Today we're going to be learning about Chapter 6 in the Power of Critical Thinking, 7th edition, and this is a chapter called Fallacies and Persuaders. A very short, this is kind of non-representative of what's actually going to, how long it's going to take me today. Fallacies that are irrelevant premises, fallacies that are unacceptable premises, and persuaders known as rhetorical moves. Okay. And then we have the normal homework, but then next is your study guide and exam. So that'll be the next video today. Anyway, when we're talking about fallacies, this is what we mean. And this definition comes from the glossary, and that's the one I want you to use on the test. An argument form that is both common and defective, semicolon, a recurring mistake in reasoning. Okay. Now, our book, the beginning of the chapter, tells us that there are certain types of defective arguments that recur so frequently that they have names. And just in case you're not impressed by this list of fallacies, I think I have posted for you under the chapter notes and such, Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy article on fallacies, and they have as a list, over 300 identified and named fallacies. We human beings are often messed up in our reasoning, and so we have lots of things. And these, like I said, these are so, these occur so often that we've given them names. Oh, that's a slippery slope. Oh, that's something else. So anyway, I'm going to walk through some of the definitions for you, and then we're going to talk a little bit about everybody. The irrelevant premises have no bearing on the truth of the conclusion. Okay, they're distractions. Unacceptable premises are relevant to the conclusion, but they are dubious in some way. The evidence they offer is too weak to adequately support the conclusion. So when we rely on these fallacies, we're just undercutting our own argument. Okay. And lastly, the rhetoric in our book, in our sense here, is the use of non-argumentative, emotive words and phrases to persuade or influence an audience, primarily through the artfulness of emotion-laden language. We want to pull on your heartstrings, okay? We want to, in this way, we want to make emotion the center of our argument, okay? And we know already that when we resort to just emotion, we may get the result we want, but it's not very ethical. Okay, and there's a whole bunch of those. Okay, so what I'm going to tell you, I'm going to walk through these definitions and things. I've got pages and pages of notes for that. And I want you to focus just so you can tell things apart, and so that you're aware that there are all these possibilities. And a lot of these are basically subheadings under fallacies, and then there are a whole bunch of other named ones that go along with it. And the book does some of them, but there are lots and lots and lots. Yeah, anyway. So when we're talking about irrelevant premises, we're talking about those that have no bearing on the truth. Okay, they're distractions. And so I'm going to walk through what these are and give you some definitions. So these start at the bottom of page 190. Genetic fallacy, we've already seen this one once before. And we have it in two different ways, basically. One is, the genetic fallacy is, sorry, I wrote things down so I can have them and then I don't use it. Genetic fallacy is a claim is true or false based solely because of its origin. That's why it's genetic, okay? It's solely based on its origin. And the way we use genetic fallacy here is if a particular type of person, a Democrat, a Republican, name something, or an inanimate object, okay, It's best to restrict genetic fallacy to non-human and abstract origins. I like that better than what I was trying to say. Okay. You know, you can safely dismiss that it's the brainchild of a liberal think tank, or you can reject that proposal because it comes from the Republican Party. Or, you know, somebody had a dream, and so, you know, got to be careful about that. A genetic fallacy is accepting or denying a claim based solely on where it comes from. Okay. The next one is composition. Composition says what's true of the parts must be true of the whole. Okay, so you're building something there. There's division as well, and so you have to kind of keep these separately. Composition, what is true of the parts must be true of the whole, whether that's members of a group or parts of a whole. They give the thing about, you know, SAT scores of this group is higher than this group. So the SAT scores of individuals in this side is higher than all the individuals in this side, okay, which is not necessarily true. Average stuff. One thing about Dr. Vaughn, he does give some really good examples, better than the ones I could come up with. Division is the flip side. It's arguing that what is true of the whole must be true of the parts. I just did that wrong because I do it wrong all the time. So you have an engine, okay? The engine in your truck is really heavy. So all the parts of that engine have to be heavy individually, okay? Not necessarily true. Pistons don't weigh that much. Appeal to the person, what we call ad hominem, which means to the man. You can also be ad feminam, to the female. But we don't usually say that because that's how we grew up, right? That's patriarchy. Claims have to be judged on their own merits. They're not guilty by association. So just because this person, not somebody you like all that well, doesn't mean that they can't get the truth right every once in a while. Okay? Doesn't matter where the truth comes from. Okay? So we have this idea that because somebody is evil, okay, we never take anything Hitler says as true. And then there's this little quote on the side of the book. The broad mass of a nation will more easily fall victim to a big lie than to a small one. Nazi Germany, anyone? Okay. So there is also, we tend to not want to listen to somebody we think is a hypocrite. Okay. And I hear this a lot from my students. That they used to be involved in a particular religion, or they used to have certain things that they did, and these days not so much because they're, you know, the church is full of hypocrites. And that's true. We all sin. We all do stuff. But that's not a good reason for neglecting those claims. It's a fallacy. Okay. And that's right here on page 194. And this is called tu quoque. Basically, you're another. You're the other. Okay? Basically, you're two-faced, right? You have two different ideas. It's all kinds of interesting. Whether someone is hypocritical regarding their claims can have no bearing on the truth of those claims. We may, of course, condemn someone for hypocrisy, but we logically cannot use that hypocrisy as a justification for rejecting their views. Their views must stand or fall on their own merits. Okay, and there are a couple other types underneath there, but that's one is important. Equivocation. Using a word in two different senses in the same argument. Excuse me. So, page 195. The end of everything is its perfection. The end of life is death. Therefore, death is a perfection of life. Okay, that's not true. That's just really silly. Okay, because we have all these things about the end of everything. Okay, now the end, okay, of something can be the end done, or it can be the end result. Okay, and we still have the same thing here. The second one, you get all kinds of problems with. But on page 195, there's all kinds of cool things. The fallacy of equivocation occurs whenever a word has one meaning in one premise and another meaning in another premise or the conclusion. The switch of senses always invalidates the argument. You have to keep your definitions the same throughout, or it doesn't work. Okay. And we have a lot of different appeals. Appeal to popularity, we've talked about before, is appeal to the masses. Okay. When you believe a claim, or you claim that you should believe this claim because everybody else does. Okay. Usually it's the opposite. Rejecting a claim by criticizing the person. There we go. Appeal to popularity, appeal to the masses, and appeal to tradition. This is the way we've always done it, right? Both of those are, in fact, incorrect. They are fallacies. They are fallacies in large state because that's not a good reason for doing it, right? These are irrelevant. Doesn't matter how many people believe it. It has to be true on its own merits. Ding. Appeal to ignorance sounds like something you shouldn't do, right? Appeal to ignorance is basically saying, well, because they haven't proved that it's not true, it must be true. Which also sounds kind of weird. The lack of evidence proves something. And when we get to this part, we know a lack of evidence proves nothing, right? And we're looking here at the burden of proof. This is where this comes in. The burden of proof is the weight of evidence or argument required by one side of the debate or disagreement. Usually defaults to the side making the positive claim. If you say unicorns exist, you're the one who has to prove it. You cannot ask or expect the other side to prove that there isn't. Okay? That's not how it works. Well, it might work that way. People might like it to work that way, but not so much. Burden of proof is on page 199. Okay. Appeal to emotion. Again, this is sort of getting into the rhetoric stuff, but when we appeal to emotion as our sole force behind our argument, it doesn't work. Okay, just because you like something or heartily dislike something doesn't make it true or false. Okay, remember, we are not infallible. Relativism does not work. Relativism is a lie. Truth is truth, period. The can you prove a negative is the thing about the unicorns on page 200. Most of the time, we also we appeal to emotion. There's a bunch of them here on page 201. Appeal to pity, apple polishing, scare tactics. Appeals come in different flavors. So one of my favorite ones, funniest ones, is a red herring. And this comes from the way English hunters would train their dogs to stay on the trail of whatever they're hunting, the fox mostly. And so they would, as kind of the final exam, dogs ready for field work basically, they would take a red herring, which is a really stinky fish, and drag it across the scent line that they actually wanted them to follow. So the point of this is that it's a distraction. It's a huge distraction. And our job, as was the hunting dog's job, is to not be distracted by it. Okay? A red herring is the deliberate raising of an irrelevant issue during an argument. And a lot of times these red herrings are also ad hominem kind of things. Okay, we're going to mess with people. Another one that is interesting is the straw man up here. Straw man is basically taking somebody's argument and distilling it down till it's almost absurd so that it's easier for you to say, oh, look at that, it just doesn't make any sense. And so it's the distorting, weakening, or oversimplifying of someone's position so it can be more easily attacked or refuted. And it happens a lot, again, especially in political ads. And we have to be careful that we're looking at the actual argument and not the one that's been boiled down for us. There is a review notes box with all of these definitions on page 203. One more that is kind of juvenile, but happens, I think, more for adults than it does for little ones. Two wrongs make a right. Oh, did I put that up there? I gotta put that up there. Here. Two wrongs. And we know two wrongs don't make a right. Okay, so two wrongs make a right is a fallacy. It's arguing that you're doing something morally wrong is justified because someone else has done the same or similar, maybe worse thing. Okay, and again, we know if your action is morally impermissible, someone else's deed cannot make it right. Okay, so he hit me first. Okay. My wife had an affair, so I'm within my rights to have one too. Sitcoms are full of this one, right? Somebody cheats on the other. They don't really want to break up, but the other one says, oh, well, then I get to cheat. I get to have. Yeah. Doesn't work. Never works. This is also the eye for an eye principle, similar to wrongs make a right views. It's not justice. It's personal vengeance, which is immoral. Okay, that's why we have laws. Okay, unacceptable premises. So these are premises that are relevant, but they're dubious and weak. Okay, so we have to be careful of them. Begging the question, not the same as equivocation. Okay, don't get those two messed up. Begging the question, we also call it arguing in a circle, is using, it's the attempt to establish the conclusion of an argument by using that conclusion as a premise. Okay, so they have some really good examples here. The one that is interesting, the Bible says that God exists. The Bible is true because God wrote it. Therefore, God exists. Now, don't let me step on your toes for your faith. But from the outside world, that is arguing in a circle. Okay. Next, false dilemma is asserting that there are only two alternatives to consider when there are actually more than two. Okay, and this one comes up a lot. Look, either you support the war or you are a traitor to your country. You don't support the war, so you're a traitor. There are lots of possibilities for truth in between those two extremes. Okay, and you know that's all kinds of interesting. False dilemmas, over here on Further Thought on page 207, theories of creation are very varied. So are other theories of how we got here. And so we have to be careful not to believe that if we can show evolution is not true, then creation has to be true. This is not a deductive argument. We have lots of possibilities. Okay, so we have to be careful. False dilemma. Something related to a false dilemma. One more thing about false dilemmas, sorry. People are often taken in by false dilemmas because they don't think beyond the alternatives laid before them. I would say this is true about our current political system here. We have two parties, right? We're either Democrat or Republican. Well, we have other possibilities. They're just not very loud or big or highly followed. Now, some people, some people are very, very much into their particular party. But we have to know on presidential ballot, sometimes on local ballots, you will have another choice. If you go someplace else, if you're a citizen of the UK, you have lots of choices. Okay, there is a major party who's in control right now. It could be by a little tiny margin. It could be by a huge margin. Depends upon the week. Okay, so anyway, another very closely related is what we call a decision point fallacy. It's the line in the sand. Okay. me see if I wrote that down. I don't think that's. Then I ran out of book and had to go other places. So, false dilemma. Decision point false. It's a variation of false dilemma. From the glossary, it's arguing that because a line or distinction cannot be drawn at any point in a process, there are no differences or gradations in that process. And Dr. Vaughn gives us a couple of different possibilities there. It is the baldness thing. How can you tell? When is the exact point somebody becomes bald? I think it depends on the person. But anyway, it's hard to pinpoint, so it never happened. You can't say anybody's bald. Well, okay, we know that's not really true. Opposing arguments that are far more serious about abortion rights version and the right to life version. When does a conceived being become a person? Okay. And yeah, I'm not going to go down that road today. Okay. Slippery slope is arguing without good reasons that taking a particular step will inevitably lead to a further undesirable step or steps the world will end, kind of thing. And there's a particular format as well. Doing action A will lead to action B, which will lead to action C, which will result in calamitous action D. Therefore, you should not do action A. I've seen this for lots and lots of things. Of course, classic example is the war in Vietnam. There is a review notes box at the bottom of 209. And then there's some very interesting pieces here about whose pants are on fire. Slippery slope are fallacies, not because they assert that one event or state of affairs can inevitably lead to others, because that might be true, but because there is no good reason to believe the assertion. Okay, so step A is not actually going to lead to step B or C or D. Okay, so we have to be careful how we use that. And then there's the possibility of something that sounds like a slippery slope, but it's actually real. If you have Lyme disease, you definitely should get medical treatment. Without treatment, you could develop life-threatening complications. Man, you could die. You should see your doctor now. Not a slippery slope, okay? And then I love this, whose pants are on fire. PolitiFact.com is scary and hilarious at the same time, but there's a whole bunch of examples there. Hasty generalization, we talked about this in chapter 4. We're going to talk about it again in chapter 9. But we are guilty of hasty generalizations when we draw a conclusion about a whole group based on an inadequate sample of the group. And inadequate can be that it's too small. It can also be that it doesn't fully represent all the attributes of the group correctly. Okay. So this is just the premises stating the sample size are relevant to the conclusion, but they provide inadequate evidence. Okay. There's all kinds of fun ones there. And the last one in this section, faulty analogy. We use good arguments by analogy. This is like this, so we have to be careful that this isn't also like this. Okay. Defective arguments by analogy or faulty analogies is a faulty analogy. The things being compared are not sufficiently similar in relevant ways. Okay. It can just be a weak argument. It can be a failed argument, but it's not a good argument either way. Okay. The last section in this book is on rhetorical moves. And remember, rhetoric in this case is the use of non-argumentative emotive words and phrases, emotional. Words and phrases to persuade or influence an audience, primarily through the artfulness of emotion-related action. Look at that. Language, sorry. And there are different types of this, right? Innuendo, we often say sexual innuendo, but in this case, the innuendo is suggesting something denigrating, negative, about a person without explicitly stating it. I'm fairly sure that Senator Johnson's youthful indiscretion involving alcohol, marijuana, and crack cocaine probably have no influence on her current public service. You're not saying that she's a drug addict, but you're implying it, okay? Euphemisms and dysphemisms. Euphemisms are words that we use to imply positive or neutral ideas instead of negative ones or scary or embarrassing ones, okay? We're all familiar with the euphemism of, can I use the ladies' room? Okay, you're not asking out loud what you have to do. Dysphemism is the opposite of that, using words with negative connotations in place of those that are neutral or good, positive rather, okay? So they can both be done properly, but we're relying heavily on the connotation of the word in order to get the reaction that we want. And there's all kinds of fun things here. Revenue enhancement for tax increase, downsizing for firing, armed reconnaissance for bombing, neutralize for kill, all those kinds of things that we have. And then there's a whole bunch of other ones there in the list. Keep in mind that some euphemisms are useful to maintain age appropriateness or decorum. There are certain things we don't discuss in public. Keep your privates private, right? That kind of stuff. It's hard to get around a lot of that today. Difficult to raise young children in today's society. Stereotyping, we've also talked about before back in chapter 2. It's an unwarranted conclusion or generalization about an entire group of people. And really, it's used to induce a baseless negative opinion of some person or some group of people. Okay, stereotyping is rarely a good thing. I can't think of a way it would be a good thing, but it's also a bit of a rhetorical move because it's giving us, again, emotion-laden information. Ridicule, we know, is the use of derision, okay, talking against somebody, sarcasm, laughter, or mockery to disparage a person or idea, okay? It works because it gets an emotional response out of you, even if that emotional response is a bark of laughter. It got your attention, okay? It leads you to dismiss people or ideas for no good reason, okay? Remember, when ridicule does its work, it makes no appeal to evidence or argument. It might be interesting or amusing or aggravating, but its whole work there is to distract you. Okay. The last little piece here is about rhetorical definitions. Okay, this is on page 215. A rhetorical definition is to influence through an emotion-charged, skewed definition. Okay, it starts with the truth and then it leans it a little. Okay, it's not a lexical definition, which is how native speakers use the word. It's not a stipulative definition that deliberately assigned for ease of use. S's. A lot of times when we use a stipulative definition, we are using, we call something a certain thing. It's a jargon for this particular realm of knowledge or practice or discipline or job or whatever. Precising is assigned to disambiguate. We have 3 words that are very similar, and so we're going to pick out the particular piece of each of those words that makes them different. Okay, that's the stipulative definition. Happens quite a bit on Wikipedia. You have a lot of folks that have the same name, okay? And so you have to disambiguate on a page here. If you mean this person, you know, this is a bishop in the 4th century, this is a king of France in the 14th century, this is, you know, whatever. Same name, different guy. Okay, so be careful about those. A rhetorical definition wants to sway you toward particular attitudes or beliefs. Okay. Now, I'm going to tell you one thing about how this is going to work on a test. On our exam 2, study guide 2, these are going to be the possibilities for the matching. Okay, so the definitions of the irrelevant premises, unacceptable premises, and rhetorical moves. Other stuff from the chapter, things like burden of proof, these guys are going to be in a different part, but the matching for test number 2 is just going to be these things. Okay, I think that's the best way to deploy that. So anyway, we'll talk about that in a little bit. So I hope you're understanding chapter 6 a little bit better. Walk through it, read through it. There's a lot of definitions. Okay, and we're just going to kind of run with that. So let me know if you have questions. You know how to get a hold of me.